Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be introducing Module Three's required film viewing, Carrie, from 1976. Carrie's one of my favorite films. I showed it many times when I've taught this class in face-to-face in person. And it got a lot of great reaction from the students, and I just think it's one of the great films of the 70s. Of course, in this module, we're talking about the new Hollywood of the 70s after the rating systems were intact and there was a greater freedom to tell stories that explored sexuality, that explored violence, that explored more adult themes. It's also a reflection of the mid-70s post-Vietnam era when the focus was more on the individual moving forward in society and exploring themselves. And Carrie deals with all these themes. Of course, this is widely known as not only one of the best films of the 70s, but one of the best adaptations of a Stephen King novel. It's based on the 1974 Stephen King novel of the same name. And if you don't know the story, it deals with a young girl, Carrie, who's 17. She's very isolated. She is being raised by a fanatical, over-religious mother who is a bit on the crazy side. And she's been sheltered from all sorts of things that a normal 17-year-old would know, including about her own sexuality. And that's how the film begins. Carrie is also wrestling with a power she doesn't understand, telekinesis. And telekinesis is the ability to move things with your mind when you get in an emotional state. So the film is looking at all these things as it starts. Carrie is played by Sissy Spacek. We'll get to the performances later. She's terrific. But the film really deals with Carrie and her interactions with her mother, of course, at the forefront, and other students at the high school she attends, Bates High School, which is a sly reference to Hitchcock, which I'll get to later. But it's about her dealing with and being really tormented and bullied by her classmates at her high school, and really by her mother, that her tumultuous relationship with her mother. She's trying to become an adult and move on from adolescence to adulthood, and her mother wants to repress this. This is all at the foreground of Carrie. Of course, what happens is a kindly classmate, Sue, who lives next door, tries to help Carrie by having Carrie go to the prom with her boyfriend, Tommy. And while this seems like a perfect fantasy, things do go wrong, unleashing Carrie's powers when it all comes apart to a very suspenseful, terrifying conclusion. Basically, this is the story. Why it's important, why we're watching it, is because it's a reflection of the type of R-rated adult film you would see in the late 60s to mid 70s to late 70s, filled with openness in its terms of nudity, sexuality, language, adult themes. It's also a reflection of a film focusing on individuals. This was very important at this time. An individual finding themselves, Carrie in this case, finding herself, and really coming to terms, it's in a feminist aspect, with her sexuality. Coming to terms fully with her sexuality. It's a great look at that. It's also a very timely look at being bullied, which is something that makes this film still, sadly, very fresh now, because it's looking at being bullied. And tormented by classmates, friends, peers, which is makes for an angst-filled, depression, horrible existence for the title character, Carrie. What I want you to focus on while you're watching this film are the great performances. In the film, Sissy Spacek plays Carrie. Her mother is played by classic actress Piper Laurie. Both were actually Oscar nominated, which at this time was a little rare for a horror film, but they're terrific. Spacek gives a vulnerability, an angst to her character. You can really feel for her. She invests it with a lot of her own pain. She was a method actor. She studied the method, which we talked about last week with Brando, using her own emotions, sense, memory, and recall into her performances. She also gives a lot of power to Carrie. She can eventually stand up to her mother, and those scenes with the mother have a lot of dynamic of power to them. Mom is played by Piper Laurie, and this role could have gone wrong. It could have been over the top. It could have been just ridiculous. She invests it with a lot of repressed sexuality, and that she's a beautiful woman herself gives it a lot of edge. Laurie is a beautiful woman, so seeing her play a repressed woman who strays away from sexuality, who fears it, who just wants her sexuality actually to be her connection with God and Jesus, it gives, again, the film a very dynamic subtext. Also, focus on director Brian De Palma. Brian De Palma was one of those directors we talked about in the module of the 70s who was schooled at film schools, who had his own vision. His cohorts, Martin Scorsese, Spielberg, Francis Coppola, all came out at this time. Brian De Palma, a lot of you would probably know him for his 80s films, Scarface, Untouchables, but he made a lot of great suspense films in the 70s, horror films such as Carrie. He was known for an eclectic visual style, injecting black humor into his suspense stories, using the camera, I should say, visually to really create a very exciting story. His influence was Hitchcock, who we saw that clip in last week in the Psycho clip from 1960 Psycho. And Hitchcock was known for visualizing things quite well. And De Palma emulates this. He even has an in-joke. The school is called Bates High in the film. Note the prom scene. This is a perfect example of what film does best. It is using the camera to tell us everything about misunderstandings, the characters' feelings, their reactions. There's almost no dialogue toward the end of the prom scene when everything goes to hell. Notice that part of the prom scene and how there's no use of dialogue and we're just dependent on the camera and the director's vision to tell us what's going on. This is what film does well. Also, a lot of you noted in the silent film reaction to City Lights the power of music to highlight emotion and to create tension. It does it in horror films more than anything. Picture this film without its effective music. The music really highlights each scene, highlights the emotion and the tension and the suspense. Keep all of that in mind while you're watching it, and really how it's a reflection of the time and a movement in a future direction of the new Hollywood, telling more open stories, what we're more accustomed to now. So I hope you enjoy this week's film, Carrie.